Hi there, Michelle here from Shell McQuay TV. We're helping you find ways to move from functioning to flourishing by putting the latest science to the real-world test. Now today I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to the man who's known as the Indiana Jones of positive psychology, Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener. Ever since the 1970s, when Robert travelled across the USA facing backward in his parents' station wagon, he's been fascinated by seeing the world from a fresh perspective. This extends to his scientific study of happiness. As a researcher, Dr. Biswas-Diener spent a decade looking for happiness in unusual places, among sex workers in Calcutta, in homeless shelters in California, and among Amish farmers in the Midwest. The result of his investigations led him to believe that comfort is overrated and that true happiness includes occasional guilt, sadness, and anger. He's the author of The Upside of Your Dark Side, a book that argues that we must embrace distress and discomfort to be whole, happy, and successful. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me. It is absolutely my honor to be here with you.
Thanks, Robert. I've been fascinated by your work for many, many years, not least because you do go and interview and look for happiness in such unusual places. So when this new book came out, I couldn't wait to read it. And I thought the arguments that you're making about this balance of kind of positive and negative in life is so important. So why do you think comfort has become overrated when it comes to that sense of wholeness and well-being and happiness in our lives?
Well, at the risk of sounding a little bit too kind of heady and intellectual about this, we exist not just in a post-industrial age, but a post-material age. That is, for a whole long time, humans of all walks of life were primarily concerned with shelter, food, and basic amenities and increasingly nice versions of that. We're not looking for a safe cave anymore. We're looking to own our own house debt free. But houses are getting incredibly nice. The fact that you can add central heating or air conditioning to them, that people don't have to share, a whole family shares a bedroom, but now houses can be large enough that individuals share a bedroom. I mean, across the last 500 years or so, humanity has reached, on average, a state of material prosperity that is allowing for rates of comfort and privacy like at no time in history. And I'm saying that with the caveat that I understand there's poverty in the world, of course, and I understand that there's hardship. These comments are largely directed to people living in economically developed, industrialized, and Western countries, and living in the mainstream. But even people living in for example, ghettoized areas of Los Angeles or New York, for example, have a much higher material quality of life than even affluent people did 300 years ago. So we've achieved this material prosperity that has allowed us in many ways to turn our attention towards really the icing on the cake, the good life in terms of what's the newest movie with the coolest special effects, who has the newest iPhone, can I keep up with the latest fashions? Do I have shoes for skiing and shoes for walking and shoes for a dinner party and shoes for every occasion? I mean, we really are in a very privileged position where we get to now even work on my own meaning at work. I don't just have to show up, but now I get to bring my values to work and make sure that my work has an impact, and it's not just about a paycheck or a supply or sales quota. So we've achieved something that we've never had before, and largely that thing is comfort.
So what's the problem with that? So that all sounds pretty good, and you've clearly been in my wardrobe and looked at my shoes. What's the problem with that? What's the problem with being too comfortable when it comes to our well-being and happiness?
Yeah, well, so this is actually a little bit tricky to talk about, because there's almost no way for me to talk about this without me either seeming like a terrible curmudgeon, or for me to seem like, like I'm this like 180-year-old man shaking my fist saying, back in the old days it was so great. The truth is, comfort is wonderful. People have a natural leaning for comfort. If I gave you the opportunity to sleep on a bed of loose rocks or on a feather bed, you would choose the feather bed. People want things to be easier rather than harder, more pleasant rather than unpleasant. I'm included among them. So comfort holds a natural appeal, But by seeking out and achieving a more constant state of comfort, we can actually fall out of practice with discomfort. And that's really what the problem is. It's not so much that comfort is inherently problematic, but rather when comfort becomes the new resting state, that discomfort seems more alien, harsher, and more uncomfortable than it has at any time in history. And I think you can see this, for example, with anxiety. I certainly grew up with my aged grandparents who had lived through both world wars, and they had a kind of a hardier, more resilient, more stoic attitude about what life in wartime was like, or life in the American Great Depression, where they took hardship as a matter of course. They didn't think it was any more pleasant than you or I do, but they certainly thought that it was something that you could just suffer through and get by, and that we're all tough enough to kind of take it. And now, and especially in the younger generation, you find kids that really want their way. They want to get their certain seat in the car on their way to school, or listen to their radio station, or they want to be entertained every second. And it does seem like things are changing in that collectively we may have lost a little bit of our ability to tolerate distress. That anxiety, for example, stress seems like it's almost in epidemic proportions, and that it's a particular stinging hardship for us. I just don't know, if I think about my uncle, for example, who worked on a farm. I don't think that he ever came home and said, I had such a stressful day at work. I think he just came home and then he had his evening. And I'm glad that people can start identifying their emotional experiences and talk about them. But we act as if a delay at the airport is a true hardship, in the same way that someone who's diagnosed with a terminal illness thinks that their illness is a hardship. And I guarantee you a terminal illness is a lot more harrowing than is a delay at the airport, for example.
So for somebody who's spent, I know, most of your career researching happiness, why do you think this ability to be able to be uncomfortable or comfortable with discomfort, and to be able to navigate anxiety and some of those other negative emotions is becoming so important for us to ultimately, I guess, have more of that sense of well-being and happiness? Because it can kind of sound a bit left field for somebody in the field of positive psychology to suddenly be encouraging us to get comfortable with some discomfort in our lives.
Absolutely, and to be honest, my staunchest critics have accused me in writing a book called The Upside of Your Dark Side of it being a publicity stunt, and of me, kind of being a flip-flopper. And to be honest, it actually hurts my feelings a little bit, because to accuse me that a project that I spent 2 years on would be a publicity stunt is really to think quite little of me. So let me just say, I do love happiness. I've dedicated my entire professional career to the study of happiness. I think happiness is beneficial for people. I think that happiness is a desirable state. I think people ought to pursue happiness. I think that it's really, really wonderful. So I'm not out trying to write like the happiness tell-all. It turns out that happiness is bad, and if we were all grumpy instead, everything would go better. But what did happen, because I'm part of the positive psychology world, and because I rub elbows with so many people who want to talk about happiness, either professionally or personally, I found out that there was this sort of oppressive element to happiness. That is, as we have more and more material sufficiency, and we can talk about the quality of our lives more, and meaning and purpose at work more, people, especially in the United States, and to a large extent, I think, and a growing extent, in places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom, they feel an increasing compulsion to be happy, and that if you're not happy, that's sort of failing at a cultural script, that you must have done something wrong, or something must be so awful that you haven't achieved this highly desirable commodity. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think we maybe have calibrated things too far on the positive side. So really what I caution people is, yeah, absolutely you want to be happy. I would recommend that you try and spend 80% of your day or 80% of your time happy. A lot goes right for you. You get compliments, you finish work on time, you fall in love. I mean, wonderful, wonderful things. But to suggest that happiness is the only legitimate emotion, and that anger, for example, is always inappropriate, or that guilt is only a destructive emotion, or that there's no room in the world for jealousy or embarrassment, I think misses a fundamental fact about the nature of emotions, which is they're a tracking system for your life, telling you how your life is going. You need your emotions, the full palette of your emotions, to find out how your life is going. And I think about it like a thermometer. And if you think I should only be happy, that's like breaking your thermometer. It's like willingly saying I only want to be able to take the measure of a few degrees of temperature. And I think that you want to be able to kind of suss out the entirety of your experience. So I want to live in a society where people feel occasional guilt when they violate their own moral code. I want people to feel angry at injustice or angry enough to defend their children against a bully. I want people to feel embarrassment or surprise or boredom, in the minority of the time, to be certain, but those reflect real life events that happen to us, and I want people to be able to respond appropriately to them. And in doing so, ultimately, I think that makes you a full, whole human. You're not just trying to be half a human, a happy human, which comes across as, dare I say, quite American and superficial. But rather, you can just be a really complex, rich person.
I think that's so important, and having started my own journey in the positive psychology world, initially attracted to that happiness piece. But then as I learnt more and started to acquire more of the skills, realising that actually it wasn't happiness, it was that sense of wholeness or well-being or agility, if you like, to navigate the natural highs and lows that every life has, I realised that there was something to be had much richer than just happiness alone would ever have given me. And that's why I think this is such an important book, actually, certainly within the positive psychology space, but for people generally interested in this kind of area, to understand the value of the balance of positive and negative emotions. And I know one of the other bits you talk about in the book, which has been a bit controversial, is the balance also of mindfulness and mindlessness. So can you talk to us a little bit about why, from the research you've looked at, you think that's also an important part of wholeness?
Yeah, and again, this is where research has shown that something is beneficial and desirable. In this case, mindfulness, and many people increasingly are having some type of mindfulness practice, whether it's just being intentional in their decision making, or taking up yoga, or doing some type of meditation, or compassion-based meditation, acceptance-based meditation. And as this becomes more and more popular, largely because it seems to work for people, it increasingly becomes like the thing to do. In the book, we say it's the Scarlett Johansson of our time. It's like just got this smoking hot reputation. And I don't mean to deride meditation or mindfulness practices in any way. They're widely used in therapy these days because they've been shown to have wonderful effects on helping people deal effectively with overpowering and overwhelming emotional states like anxiety and depression. But to then take that to the extreme is kind of almost a kind of fascism, where we say, and people really should aspire to be totally consciously aware and intentional at every single moment in your life. And first of all, I would think, well, that sounds terrible to me. I would not want to be. I want to have the ability to kind of zone out and daydream. I want the ability to operate on autopilot, to make mistakes, to have flights of fancy that might lead to kind of distractible, creative ideas that wouldn't come about if I just try and do the hard thinking, intentional kind of direct approach to it. So again, without discrediting mindfulness, I would say, yeah, go ahead and be mindful a lot of the time, but don't make the mistake of thinking that you should be mindful all of the time, because being on autopilot doing the sleep on it effect, just kind of like zoning out while you're in the shower, which is, as we all know, the birthplace of all great ideas, and the eureka effect happens because you're not consciously hooked into your real world experience, can be hugely beneficial, again, in the minority of time or just occasionally.
And I think for me, a big part of that, and having tried mindfulness in many different guises over the years, and yes, definitely seeing benefits from meditation, from trying to be more mindfully aware, even of just where my emotional state is or how I'm responding to situations. But I also know a lot of the changes that I've been able to create from positive psychology tools has been through using habits and almost the mindlessness of those habits that have helped me to kick some things into gear around, daily little strength habits or gratitude habits or things like that, yes, while I'm present with them, they're certainly running on that neurological habit loop that I would say is more mindless than mindful at times. And so again, I think it's an important idea, this piece of balance. One of the things constantly I find with the positive psychology research is that most things are that case of not either or, but a bit of and, as you're talking about with wholeness. And so the last one I wanted to ask you about, which I know comes up in the book as well, and I think it's a bit of an and piece we all need, is around kindness. So we've seen lots of research again over recent years about the importance of kindness, but you also advocate that maybe not in all situations. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found there?
Sure. So there are a few eyebrow-raising moments in the book, and this is certainly one of them. My co-author, Todd Kashdan, and I, we do not see ourselves as provocateurs. I mean, we're not out here just to shake people up or to throw radical statements in people's face and say gotcha or anything like that, because I think that, in fact, would be unkind to readers. Rather, we're just saying, hey, could we take a fresh look at this and just consider this? And you're intelligent, and take it for what it's worth and make your own decisions about it. And kindness is one of these. Make no mistake, I think kindness is awesome. I believe the world would be better if more people were kind to one another. I'll tell you, I just came from the airport right before this, where I said to the woman next to me, hey, I'm going to run to the restroom. Would you mind watching my carry-on? I'll be back in just a minute. And she looked me in the face and said, absolutely not. You must take your bag with you. I said, okay, fair enough. It's not a demand, but that's fine. But, it's just a small thing that puts a little bit of space between people instead of inviting people in. So I really like the opportunity of doing the small things that we can to bridge the connections between us. And I love that. However, only being kind all the time does not necessarily mean that you will be the most successful person. Anyone who is a shrewd business person or who is engaged in negotiations will tell you that they believe that competition or some kind of competitive attitude has led to more market success, that led to more innovation in the marketplace, has led to wonderful products being developed. And competition itself is not inherently kind. Now, I don't think that we should be mean. So I don't think that by being unkind, you should be mean. But every once in a while, you may do something that is manipulative. And boy, that's a tough pill for people to swallow, right? But small flatteries, even if they're authentic, sincere flatteries, are a form of minor manipulation. I know I personally am guilty of, I'm going to make a confession here, guilty of cleaning the kitchen in an obvious way to ensure that I get credit for it. That's a minor manipulation of sorts. So you could say those things are unkind, but really I don't think they're unkind in the sense that they're mean to people. They're sometimes even about drawing people in or building people up, again, in authentic ways. And at the harsher end of things, in places like negotiation, or in places where you're really trying to advocate for an injustice, going and complaining to the school administration about the homework load for the children or something, doesn't necessarily always require that you flatter everyone and come in with compliments for everyone. It might just be about taking a firm stand and saying, we won't put up with this. And there's a time and a place for that. So again, using the sort of artificial 80-20 rule. I think that 80% of the time you should feel happy, and probably about 20% of the time some unhappiness is good. 80% of the time, mindful is probably awesome. 20% mindless. 80% of the time, bending over backwards, feeling empathic, feeling kind. 20% maybe being a little bit more assertive, or sometimes even a little bit more confrontational, because that's occasionally called for.
I think that 80-20 is a great guide. The other one I've found really helpful is thinking about, in this situation for this particular outcome, where do I want to be on that 80-20? What's going to serve me best? And also remembering, and the book has a wealth of wonderful studies and research in there that people can dig into, but remembering each time we're looking at that research, what we're seeing is what works for some of the people some of the time, and that we need that sense of wholeness and confidence within ourselves, and the willingness to experiment and play to figure out what's right for us with these ideas. Robert, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Did you want to add something there? Sorry, I cut.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this one last thing it's probably the thing that I'm the most proud of, and I don't mean that in the I'm better than you sense of the word. I just mean I really love this aspect of the book, which is it is not a book that says we figured it out. Here's the one right thing, cut this thing out of your diet, or this is how you can exercise yourself to good shape, or happiness is the one key to your success at work. What it says is, and you used this beautiful word before, agility. It says the world's constantly changing, and you need to be able to shift and do a whole bunch of different stuff in order to be optimally successful. In every different situation and interaction is going to call for a different psychological state and different tool. And so in some ways, we're simply recommending the whole palette rather than a myopic look at only one color.
And that's why I think the book is so important for people to read, because I do think it helps to bring that pendulum back a bit more to a place of not just reality, but probably health for all of us, about understanding, more of this, and just being a little bit more intelligent about how we apply some of the positive psychology tools. I often say to people, you wouldn't use a hammer to fix everything in your house, and positive psychology is not a blunt instrument, so you need to apply your intelligence to some of these ideas and figure out what's right for you. So, Robert, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle.
If you're wanting to cultivate and nurture more wholeness in your life, then I highly recommend grabbing a copy of Robert's new book, The Upside of Your Dark Side, and really seeing how you can balance the positive and the negative in your life to have more wholeness. And if you're looking for more on Robert's adventures, be sure to stop by positiveacorn.com, where you can see more of his work. Of course, if you want more tested, practical and playful ways to move from functioning to flourishing, head on over to michellemcquaid.com, leave your name and email address so you can hear all our news first. Thank you so much for watching Michelle McQuaid TV. Remember, you are good enough, so don't be afraid to let your light shine. Until next time, take care.